Welcome to the Arrive and Thrive Career Podcast, mate.
Thanks, Ty. Good morning. Great to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me on.
Appreciate it, buddy. Now, you were, and it must be honest with the listeners, you are someone that I work with at the co-working space here in Mornington, and I've always admired the way in which you go about your work and the types of clients that you work with. And we had a bit of an opening come up this morning with a guest cancelling, and I was like, oh, Tommy, can you do a podcast with me, mate, please? And being the legend that you are, you said yes. So thanks so much, man. And please introduce yourself to the listeners and what it is that you do.
Yeah, thank you, Ty. That was a very generous introduction, and always happy to step in and help out, mate. Of course, love working with you and your energy around the co-working space. So, and the way that you've helped out with some of my stuff as well. So, more than happy to return the favour. So, yeah, my career. I'll try and keep this as succinct as possible as I work in words, and I love words, but less is more with words. So yeah, when I was a kid, as soon as I realised I wasn't going to be a sports star,
football or soccer.
Yeah, rugby really.
Oh, rugby, yeah, cool.
Yeah,
yep.
but a massive passion for the round ball version of football as well, which is probably how I'll refer to it through this pod. And as soon as I realised I wasn't going to make it, I wanted the next best thing, which for me was writing about it. So the ability to be there in the live action and reporting and telling the story of a game and the narrative around it always really excited me. So I just wrote. As a kid, there's a game called Subutio, which not many Australians will probably be familiar with, but you basically flick little football players around a sort of coffee table sized pitch.
Yep.
And I used to play with my dad hours and endlessly. And
a bit like Test Match, the cricket one?
Yeah,
cool.
Kind of like.
Me and my brother are obsessed with that one.
Yeah, great game. So I used to write match reports, and I used to write Football Manager on the computer. I used to write books about a season and stuff like that. I used to just love writing about sport. So that was always where I wanted to go. And then, in the UK where I grew up, it's not necessarily such a vocational approach as I believe it is here in terms of education. So certainly further education as well. University, I was encouraged to study English. I always wanted to be a journalist, but it was study English. So I did, and forever grateful really that I did, because it kind of really opened my horizons to what else was out there. It wasn't just kind of pigeonholing myself as a journalist, and this was going to be me, and this was the direction I took. So I studied English, and I spent every spare minute really trying to get practice and work experience writing. So I wrote for Practical Caravan magazine. I can't claim to love caravans, and writing, doing product reviews on kind of extendable sponges to reach the top of your caravan. But that's where I was, and that's where I spent a summer. Also spent a summer working for 442 magazine, which was a football magazine, and actually we're in the middle of the Ashes as we record this. Spent the week's work experience watching the Ashes, so I thought, this sports journalism paper is okay.
So bro, just to clarify, so you were at high school, and in the UK, it was like, well, you can't necessarily study journalism. It's studying the art of literature in English. Is that?
It was probably later in my education journey.
Yeah, cool.
So this was sort of what we call further education, which is years 12 and 13 here.
Yeah, cool.
And then university.
Yep.
But yeah, always had that career direction in mind.
Cool.
So yeah, as I said, grabbing work experience wherever I could, just trying to speak to people wherever I could, and just trying to find opportunities for anything that I could do to write and kind of continue my journey towards writing professionally. As I said to you offline before we came on, for me, work, if you can find your passion, discover your passion, understand it, and find a way to get paid for it, then I think that's a pretty cool thing.
Totally.
I've got a young family now, and for me it's about working to live. Not living to work. It's a lyric in a song that I think it was a Stereophonics song actually that I loved and kind of really I know it's been said many times, but it kind of really resonated with me. And you know, of course, in this world, we have to find a way to earn a crust. And I figure, you know, and you'll know, I'm sure, Ty, the stats and the hours that we spend at work, hey, you may as well enjoy it. You know?
90,000 hours we average in our lifetime.
I knew you'd know.
But you're so right, man. Like, I grew up with my dad and my mum doing things that they loved, and my dad would just constantly say, you know, if you do something you love, you don't work a day in your life. And you know, when I was younger, I was like, sure, mate, like, cool. But, you know, when you're actually doing it yourself, it rings true. It really does.
Yeah, it's about being passionate, you know, and really being engaged with every moment. And I think being passionate is going to help you do that. And look, don't get me wrong, there are times that I wish I did a different job, that I was in a different career. There are times when I really don't want to be at work. It's not all sunshine and smiles, but generally I get very excited every morning to kind of go to work, and I consider myself very fortunate to be in that position. But I've also worked really hard to make that a possibility. So I studied English at uni and continued to pick up as much work experience at a complete array of different sort of publications.
So just saying yes to any opportunity.
Yeah,
love that.
Yeah, absolutely, anything. But it soon became clear. Actually, sorry, to rewind just a second. I wrote for my student newspaper while I was at uni, just relentlessly as well.
What was the student newspaper called?
It was called Western Eye.
Western Eye?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we had this crazy logo of a big scary eye in the masthead of the paper. So I worked my way up through that. Do you have student newspapers here?
Yeah, so we've got like student clubs and I suppose, publications that students run and podcasts, and there's like news channels even. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are so many channels available to us now that I didn't have, obviously, when I was at uni. I think I'm a similar vintage to you, Ty. So we're kind of on that cusp of moving into the hyper-digital world. But ultimately, just if there's not a newspaper or there's not a podcast or there's not a website, go out and create one, you know, or speak to somebody about, you know, them providing the funding so you can do it, because, you know, why not? It's so accessible to us now. If that's something that you want to do, if it's content is something that excites you, then go out there and do it, because it's such a cool way to communicate with people and to build communities, which for me is what it's all about. So I became the sports editor of the student paper. We had a pretty significant sort of sporting side at the university I went to. And then
did this come out like once a week? And
good question. I think it was between fortnightly and monthly, but it was up to the editor. So there was an editor had a year in the position. It was a fixed contract. You actually got paid for it.
Oh, awesome.
It was awarded to you couldn't be a student. You have graduated or be taking a year out to do it. And and I landed that job when I graduated. It was it was huge for me, to be honest. It was a really significant moment in my career. Aside from the editor, everyone else is voluntary, so you're just chipping in hours when you can, and you do have a few spare hours at uni. Don't you? You probably don't think of it at the time, but
I suppose you get to interview like cool things as well. Like I'm assuming like university sport teams and issues around the campus and bringing awareness to different things and different student stories.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, again, to I don't want to go too deep into the detail and nuance, but the student union at my university was quite strong. So the student union would basically hold the university to account. Yeah. So when I got my head out of the sports stuff, it was actually fairly interesting to go and speak to the Vice Chancellor, interview him about some pretty hot topics. Yeah, cool. On campus and off campus as well, in the broader kind of university sphere. So I think, again, just to get outside of my lane, which was obviously sport, and kind of get my head into maybe politics or the human side of things, was really good experience as well. So I had a year as the editor, which was a full-time contract. Paid peanuts, but it was it was beer money, and and it was ultimately a great experience. And just kept up as much voluntary or scratchings of sort of paid work outside of that. Again, in the industry that I wanted to go into. After that, it became clear I was on the cusp of in the UK. They brought in something called the NCTJ, which was a qualification to be a journalist, and I decided that I didn't really want to do that. Mm-hmm. For me, and this is specifically about it's specifically about writing, but I guess it transcends into other areas of life as well. Writing is creative for me. I love personality through writing, and this NCTJ course for me was trying to pigeonhole writers and create robots, which is when I started to fall out of love with newspaper journalism, to be honest. And when I say that, I mean really news reporting as opposed to kind of more longer sort of feature writing. But ultimately it was like, hey, here's this really fixed structure of how you should write an article. And look, there are some great frameworks out there for people to use if they want to get into writing. But ultimately for me, writing's about colour and personality. We don't want to read robots. So I kind of started to fall out of love with journalism at that point, which obviously was a kind of bit of a crossroads for me in my career, because to this point I was sort of 22, 23, just graduated and faced with this situation. I went and worked on a few local newspaper news desks and sort of just tested to make sure that this was a direction that I didn't want to pursue, and ultimately took that decision. And a job came up for me in London writing sports features for a publishing agency, which I just jumped at. And I was in Bristol at the time, which was the 4 a.m. bus on a Monday morning from Bristol into London to get me at my desk for 9 a.m. And there were some hard yards, and I was sleeping on couches in mates' houses in London just to Monday night through Thursday night, and then coming back to my flat in Bristol. So those were sort of some hard yards. The agency didn't sort of commit to me straight away. It was kind of week by week, okay, what are we doing here? But again, just grabbing an opportunity. Yeah.
Is that a common theme in back then for that industry? Like, as in demonstrating your worth through like an internship or kind of like bits and pieces of work?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And it was sort of this was GFC time. This was sort of 2008. So it was about as an early 20-something, just as you say, proving my worth and grabbing onto every straw that I thought was a positive direction for me or an opportunity. So I cut my teeth really there. I was at 5 years at an organisation called Touchline, who incidentally I still do a little bit of work for today. But in that moment, I got to interview some of my heroes. I got to interview Andy Murray, Mark Cavendish, some sort of world-renowned rugby players, and here I was either face-to-face or on the phone with my absolute heroes and trying to keep the quiver out of my voice and try and be objective and make some sense rather than just dribble at them, because I was so honoured to be in their presence.
How'd you go with that, man? Like, sorry to cut you off. Like, I feel like, I love surfing, and if I saw Kelly Slater, I would just be like, I just wouldn't know what to say. Like, whatever words that I planned to say would vanish, I feel like.
Yeah, there was a lot of shaking and a lot of sweating. I'm not going to lie. But ultimately, I've always, that feeling you get in your stomach where you put yourself in an uncomfortable position. That feeling for me is a positive feeling, because it means I'm pushing myself out of my boundaries. And
love that, Tommy.
That was something that I was doing regularly. This was my passion. It wasn't, let's say, hardcore sort of sports news reporting at the game, filing after, which I did and I've done some of, and I enjoyed that buzz, but probably didn't have exactly the right skills to cope in that high pressure time situation, whereas to sit down and have a chat with my heroes, as you and I are having a chat now, was uncomfortable, and in some instances, some pretty strong personalities. It was never a controversial conversation. I was never trying to, find the skeleton in the closet to dish some dirt on, on Davey Warner or whatever. It was a really wholly positive conversation, and really trying to understand the journey that this sports person had been on. But I'd always try and get a face-to-face with them, and that time for that person would obviously be limited. And their agents are pretty tight on them. But, and again, this would be advice to anybody listening, is just go out there and ask, because if you don't ask, you don't get. And I think quite often the agents probably didn't know that I was a 21-year-old kid in London that didn't have huge experience, asking, Lawrence Dallaglio, England rugby captain at the time, for 20 minutes face-to-face. But it doesn't really matter. They don't know what they don't know. And maybe I raised a few eyebrows when I walked in the door, but and I couldn't grow a beard at that point. But just do it. And again, you get that uncomfortable feeling in the pit of your stomach, but man, that's a good feeling. And you walk out of there, and you get your rehashing the interview in your head. Did I say the right thing? Should I say that, or should I ask that? But ultimately, the key to interviewing anybody, as you do so well, Ty, is to listen. Just to listen. So of course I would do my research for a 20-minute interview. I'd do 3 days research. Same thing for writing a feature. If you're writing a 600-word feature, I'd do 3 days research. But ultimately, is to go in there and just listen. To make sure you guide the interview in the direction that you want it to go in, to think about your audience and think about who's reading and probably what they want to hear, but also to try and get to the crux of the story and to really kind of unlock that person's passion. I love that. I really, really love that. So
just curious, man. So with the work, like fast forward a little bit. So the work that you're doing now, is that your objective always, is to kind of go, okay, the words that they're sharing and the story that they're telling, how is that appropriate to my listenership or to the community? And maybe what are the things that they're not saying that I can bring into the light as well? Or
do you know what, Ty? I think it is, and I think you've probably just unlocked something for me there. Sorry, I'm taking a while over my career journey, but it's ever evolving. My career, if I'm at a party and someone says, "Oh, what do you do?" It's never a straightforward answer. I can give a straightforward answer. I can just say I'm in marketing if that's the easiest thing to do in the moment. But
depends who you're talking to.
Exactly.
Brush them off. Oh, I'm in marketing. And they're like, "Oh, okay."
Exactly. But I think to your point, that is what I love doing. I love getting to the heart of a story, to distill what it is that excites that person or that business, that brand, that organisation, and to articulate that story for a particular audience. Look, I think you've hit on something that I didn't realise there, that actually looking back on those early days as a 20-something-year-old interviewing people, is that really to get to the heart of what motivates them, and to tell that story to somebody else, to create community, to create connection, I think is probably where my passion lies, and that's what my business is about now. I think you've hit on something really fundamental there. Thank you.
Oh, mate, it's a pleasure. Let's pivot a little bit. So, for a young person wanting to get into this type of field, we're constantly saying to regardless of any industry, saying just say yes to opportunities. Like, we have this saying, I think I kind of stole this from someone, but I can't remember who, but it's like this concept of your education and your qualification gets you a seat at the table, your experience gets you into the conversation. And so when you say yes to different opportunities, you're actually building that scope of experience to be able to share and be able to influence and be able to contribute. So for someone who's perhaps in that zone of kind of going, all right, I'm thinking about marketing communications, or I'm thinking about writing, or I'm thinking about editing, publishing, all those types of disciplines around that scope of the written and spoken word, what do you think is some advice and maybe some transferable skills that you think are really relevant to that space?
Yeah, wow, okay.
Because I think you touched on like that concept of like being able to really listen, like that active listening piece, which I think is crucial. Any others that come to mind, man?
Yeah, look, pretty straightforward, but to read as well.
Yeah, cool.
Similar is to listen, to hear other people's voices, to explore the written word and how people use it. I think is really important. And I think as well as saying yes to most things, I would say just really trust your instinct, okay? Because as you've just unlocked for me there, we don't often know the trajectory of our career, the direction that our work is going to take us. And it's I was listening to a pod just yesterday, actually, Johnny Wilkinson, another hero of mine, said, control the controllables and explore the uncontrollables.
Cool quote.
Yeah, really, really hit me because, I in certain spheres, I think it's important to control the controllables, not to get too kind of worried about it, but just to kind of. I used to think, okay, control the controllables, don't worry about the uncontrollables because you can't influence them. But actually to explore them, hey, that's pretty exciting. And I think control the controllables is, in this framework, is say yes to as many opportunities as you can if your gut says yes. If your gut says no, then kind of explore why it's saying no. But also, to move that story, my career story on a bit, when I arrived in Australia, I had an opportunity just to start my own thing. We were really fortunate with living. We were rent free the first year we were here, so we just had to pay bills. And I was down in Sorrento, so an hour and a half from Melbourne. I didn't want to kind of commute every day, so I had this window, this beautiful year to really try and get something off the ground. And in that instance, I had a one contact that somebody had given me, and I reached out to that person. That ended up being a gig that I did for 2 years and kind of really got me started. But I also just started looking at who is doing well in my field. Who do I admire?
Yep.
And again, I just reach out to them and say, hey, can I buy you a coffee? Can I come to Melbourne and buy you a coffee? And really interesting, in the UK, if I had written to 10 people, I would have got one response, I reckon. On average, and whether that person would have taken the time to meet me or not, probably 1 in 10 again.
Right.
So let's say I write to 20 people, I might get 2 responses, I might get 1 coffee. My maths has never been great, but there or thereabouts. Here, and I don't know whether it's because Melbourneites just love coffee, but I got 9 out of 10 responses, and 8 out of those 9 would meet me for coffee, and then maybe a second coffee, third coffee, fourth coffee, and I'm going, okay, geez, I'm
pretty caffeinated.
Spending a lot of money on coffee here, but I'm not sure I'm going to get any work out of this. But no, my point is that, of course, say yes to every opportunity, but you can't just wait for opportunities to come to you. You've got to go out and get them. And people have often, I've never thought of myself as in this way, but people have often sort of referred to me as fairly plucky in the way that I will just pick up the phone to anybody or email anybody and sort of really with great respect just ask if I can, ask them a few questions over coffee for 20, 30, 40 minutes. And a guy called Trevor Young, who I hugely admire in my field, became a bit of a mentor for me in that way. So, again, my advice would be, if there's something that interests you, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to sit there and ruminate and decide that this is going to be your career and that you go for it. Just pick out 3 or 4 people you like and you like what they're doing professionally, and just, reach out to them. Yeah. People in Australia especially are so kind and generous with their time, I've found. So yeah, I think that's super important. A bridge in my career, when I moved out of publishing, I went travelling for a year with my now wife, and came back, and at my sister's wedding, so I ended up speaking to somebody who was the CEO of a charity, and he gave me a job for a year and a half, which was actually working for a charity called the Mayor's Fund for London, founded by Boris Johnson. So I was working a couple of metres away from Bojo, which was interesting. But ultimately, the point of me telling you that story is, again, it could be at a wedding, it could be at a party, it could be just be interested, just ask people questions, and not just the throwaway, hey, what do you do, and then leave it there, or ask the second question, ask the third question. If it really excites you, what they do, and you can see passion, you can see that they really enjoy what they do. If you want a slice of that pie, then explore further. It might not be that you end up working for them, but it might be that they can introduce you to somebody. I just think you've got to try and create, as I said, discover your passion and create a way to get paid for it.
Yeah, in careers education, we refer to that process as like happenstance. So creating your own luck, essentially. But very rarely you can create your own luck if you're not taking action. So, as you're saying, going up to people at parties, being proactive, getting on the phone. I love the fact that, and something I've always admired, observing the work that you do. Like, you're very community and local minded too. So I think, there's something particularly powerful about supporting your local community, trying to elevate your local community as you're developing your own process and business as well. Cool, man. So just to recap, so we've got things like being able to listen, being able to read, a sense of curiosity as well. So always coming from a curious lens. Any other kind of transferable things that you think are important? And I love the fact that you also mentioned like your intuition, because I think that's a particularly strong factor for young people, because when they're faced with these decisions, they're trying to factor in, ATARs or earning potential or future work trends or the impact of technology. And I think, as you articulated, like leaning into that intuition piece to go, okay, cool. Does it light me up inside, or does it not? If it doesn't, probably a fair sign that it's not necessarily going to bring me the type of results that I want.
Yeah. So funny hearing you play those points back, because I guess what I realise is that those things don't cost any money, and actually don't cost a huge amount of fixed time. And what I mean by that, and I'm not putting people off from studying further, because, man, there's a wealth of knowledge to be explored out there, and studying is a great way to... And
the connections you get through studying too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a great way to accumulate that knowledge and to explore it. But I also think that I'm a big one for learning on the job as well, I think that to just gain that experience, and rather than... Because I could have gone and studied that NCTJ course, and I did actually start part-time while I was working as a waiter in a Spanish restaurant, but I knew that if I had studied that full time, I would have. It felt at the time I would have put myself back a year, right? Because I had to study that, I had to get the qualification, this piece of paper, and I'm not, as I said, I'm not putting people off going and studying at any point, whether it's beyond university or whether it's an alternative course, but. I would also think twice about it. I would just also consider, I think we can be on a conveyor belt in life that other people kind of want us to go on, whether that's parents, whether that's governments, and stimulus that certain organisations are pushing for. I think it's just really important to just pause and take a second and I say it all the time. I don't think selfish is a bad word. To be selfish and just to think about what it is that we want to do.
Love that.
Do I really need to go and study? Do I really need to go and spend 4 years at this institution to get this bit of paper? As I think you said, there's the education, the qualifications get you in the door, and then it's you articulate it very eloquently. But my parents were both teachers, and I remember my dad saying to me, my dad was at the equivalent of a fairly rough sort of state school, and he said, look, I've come across people who've come out of Cambridge and Oxford with firsts, top degrees, and they can't communicate. So I'm not going to employ them, and it's like, this person is probably hugely overqualified for this job, and may have been very, very good, but ultimately there are so many soft skills that you don't get from just studying a course. I think, for me personally, going to university was more about working on my ability to communicate and socialise than anything else, really. I had the piece of paper which helped when it came to playing and getting that seat at the table, but ultimately, just really important just to think about those soft skills as well.
Yeah, I love that, man. So, dude, a bit of a pivot. Again, what would you say are some of the challenges of the industry? And because you work for yourself, like being a business owner as well, like there's their own unique set of challenges. If you don't mind, could we separate like the industry challenges that you've noticed within the field, and if you want to touch on some of the challenges that you find running your own show as well?
Yeah, cool. That's a great question. So I think industry challenges for me is that the industry is ever evolving.
Yeah,
and I think that's possibly true for every industry in this kind of new age technology world. And you can either choose to try and, so let's take social media platforms for an example. You can either try and sort of keep up and stay on top of every new app or every new sort of channel that's coming out there, or you can just kind of go, do you know what? I'm not going to run down rabbit holes because, there are so many false starts with those channels. I'm just going to kind of sit back and I guess overlay my skill sets and my experience onto those platforms. And it's super important to kind of have a vague understanding of what they are, because businesses and organisations want to use them, and understandably so. But just rather than taking myself off on a TikTok course or whatever, it's just a case of, okay, I can see what TikTok's trying to do. This is how they're trying to tell their stories. And actually, do you know what? It's exactly the same as whether you're writing it through a newspaper or
interesting.
Which newspapers have been around for how many years? Ultimately, yes, our attention spans are drastically reducing, and people rarely sit down and read a 3,000 word feature anymore.
My grandpa still reads the paper front to back every morning.
Don't you just love that?
And I would love to be in that position as well. Yeah. But I think you raise a good point. Like the attention span is an interesting one.
Yeah,
I think research has shown that Gen Z, their attention span is about 8 seconds.
Yeah,
I'm a millennial. Ours is about 12 seconds. Not much better.
Yeah.
But the types of media we've consumed are things like YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, like Snapchats, TikToks, and they're like probably around that 7-10 second mark.
Yeah, and look, I don't, as I know you don't, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just that we just have to, as I said, we just kind of have to think about the principles of what the channel is trying to do, and maybe it's trying to reach a different audience. As I keep touching on, really. In my industry, I think it's really important to deeply consider that audience. What is going to engage them? What is exciting for them? How do you get that communication across? Same principles as the good old newspaper. I'm not of a wireless vintage, but the good old wireless. I just think it's important in whatever industry you are to kind of sit back and say, well, what do I think? Wherever you are. What have I learned to this point? What are my experience, and how can I overlay it on these, let's say, technological challenges that we're faced with as new platforms kind of appear every day. In terms of personal challenges, it's probably the biggest one is actually articulate, and ironically, as I articulate for a living, is articulating what I do and the importance of it, or my believed importance of it for an organisation, and the exact field I find myself now, I'm calling it brand communication, and it's how organisations communicate with their audiences. So again, that's a multi sort of channel approach. And ultimately, it's for us, for my business partner Jarrod and I, it's about taking an internal culture and getting, again, like that sports interview, getting to the crux of what that organisation is all about and communicating that to the outside world. Because I think there's such powerful stuff internally that, you know, to really try and connect an organisation, whether it's a shoe brand or whether it's I don't know, whatever.
Anything, man. Like, I think people are more driven these days by that purpose piece for, like, you know, I know people that, you know, there's only certain clothing brands they buy because of, the garment quality, but there's also like that culture around how it's made, the ethos of the company. Yeah, I think you're spot on there around communicating that brand piece, that company.
Yeah, I heard someone say recently, we don't buy a product, we buy a story. And I think that's really, really powerful. And that's kind of how I shop and how I sort of try and behave is to kind of find organisations out there that align with what I believe, learn about them, understand their story, and then sort of, you know, buy them or invest in them or you know, become part of their community. Really, really important, I think, as an organisation to build your community before you need them, if you can. So that idea of kind of growing as many followers, and I don't necessarily just mean Instagram followers. And then kind of telling them your story and being completely authentic through that story as well. I'm not saying to make up a story, obviously, because you know, people are soon going to,
people can see through the BS,
see through that. Exactly. So, but everybody has a story, right? And you know, everybody has a beautiful story in my mind. Everybody, like, I don't know, people might be sitting here listening to this thinking, "Oh, I don't have a beautiful story," but you do. Like, and just that opportunity to kind of tell that story however which way you want, I think is super exciting. And so that's what kind of gets me out of bed in the morning. That's my passion, is to help organisations tell their stories, to connect them with their audiences in any which way, whether it's a product or a service.
I love that, man. How do you feel about having your title as storyteller? Because I think it's a beautiful thing, and I love how you, through your story, you've been able to kind of separate this piece between journalism and news and going, okay, like, and that transition phase of storytelling. Because a couple of my mates are journalists, and, you know, they can be very fixed on specific facts or hooks to entice the reader and things like that, which I think is important in the game of news. Just curious to hear your perspective. Like, what's been the main difference that you've seen around being in that kind of news and newspaper and writing about certain situations compared to working with businesses and being able to articulate their story in a way that you think does their business justice? I'm assuming it's you get to be more authentic in your approach, but that's just an assumption.
Yeah. Firstly, I think I touched on this before we came online. I'm not great with labels and whether this is a bit of imposter syndrome. I kind of feel like storyteller should be kept for kind of J.R. Tolkien and the real storytellers out there. But you know,
story developer,
whatever it is, it doesn't quite have the same ring to it, does it? But no. In answer to your second question, I think what made me fall out of love with news reporting, and I still have massive admiration for journalists and the way that they do write, and in particular, you know, some journalists that I follow both online and offline in the sort of print world. Newspapers have to fill lines. They have to fill copy. And there is an agenda, whether that's an agenda that's driven by the editor of the newspaper, the owner of the newspaper or the advertising that ultimately is the way that the newspaper or the publication kind of exists. And then, look, when I say newspaper, I mean online as well. They have to write stories, and therefore you're kind of always, and not necessarily in a bad way, but you're always kind of digging for a story, and quite often there's a time pressure around that. So, your Sunday papers traditionally would have some sort of bigger features that the journalists may have spent weeks, months, years researching and understanding to kind of write those stories, whether they're groundbreaking or they're actually just really nice colour pieces about somebody. But ultimately, when you're working with a business, you're working with them, and you don't have to fill these these copy lines. You don't have to fill a blank newspaper every day, every week, or a website, a blog, whatever it is. So ultimately, it's kind of, it's how long is a piece of string as to how deep you go on this story with an organisation. And as I said, I love people. I don't know if that sounds kind of strange, but I love understanding people's stories. So for us, Jarrod and I, when we work with an organisation, and he's a graphic designer, so he kind of tells that story visually, whereas I tell it verbally, and we kind of come together on what I would call the non-verbal storytelling, which is about positioning the business. But ultimately, when we sit down with an organisation, we don't just want to sit down with the CEO for him or her to tell that story. I want to sit down with cleaner. I want to sit down with the work experience kid. Because ultimately everybody will have, and this is what's beautiful about people, everybody has a different opinion on what's going on. Everybody kind of has a different view, a vision of an understanding of what's going on. And if you can distill, kind of pull those stories, those different threads out and tie them together and kind of tell this unified story of an organisation, then for me, you get to the guts of it. You get the absolute kind of truth behind it. Jarrod and I use this visual of a tree, and everybody sees the tree, the tree trunk and the branches and the leaves, and that's cool. That's like the in an online world, that's the website, that's the brand, that's the logo, that's the social media. The most important thing is the roots. Okay. And the nutrients and everything that kind of feeds that beautiful trunk and branches and leaves. And the most important thing is to understand those roots. So for me, that is what I love about the kind of communication that I now do, having explored kind of newspaper journalism. But ultimately, in answer to your question, there's no kind of blank paper to feel. We're creating the paper. It's an absolute exploration. It's a real journey. So I've probably gone a bit off topic there, but that's what gives me the buzz.
I remember you saying too, sometimes in working with businesses, I think it was just offline before we hit record, sometimes less is more. So I think something that I was mindful of when I was working with our designer when we were starting the bones of Arrive&Thrive, it's like choosing your words carefully, like choosing the meaning that you have behind those words. Less is more sometimes. What's your take on that? Like, and what's some advice that you give businesses to be able to simplify their message?
Yeah, it ties into everything we've been saying around attention span, and as I said, I love words, but less is more. To really carefully think about those words, and Jesus, again, you probably know the stats, but how many words we say every day, will be an absolutely astronomical number. And of course, you can't give deep, great thought to every word that kind of comes out of your mouth, but ultimately to really kind of think about your values and your purpose, and to try and align your communication with that is super important. Now, not everybody, most people can write, which is great. And again, that's one of the challenges is of telling people, hey, can I come and write for your business? Because everyone's like, well, I can write. And it's like, no, I get that, and full respect. And coming from the heart is really important as well. I love it when I work with a member of an organisation who writes for themselves, and maybe they'll ask me to just do a quick edit job, and that's cool. But to get to the crux of that kind of brand communication is to give deep thought to words, and less is more, because people don't have the attention spans. And quite frankly, I don't want to sit there and spend an hour trying to understand a shoe brand to decide whether I'm going to buy their kickers or what, you know. I want to within, I'm almost on the cusp of being a millennial, I think. But I don't want to spend longer than 7 seconds getting a feel for this organisation. Yeah, because quite frankly, I got 3 beautiful kids, and I got better things to be doing.
Don't want to go through their website with a fine-tooth comb, unless you're working, of course.
Well, look, don't get me wrong. If I open up and see a grammatical error, there's no way I'm buying their shoes. No way. But you know, it's a joke, but it's attention to detail.
Yeah,
right.
For sure. Probably another skill set that you need in that line.
Absolutely. If you don't, and it's attention to detail, and it's behind attention to detail is caring, right? Yep. If you don't care, for me, if you don't care about your copy on your website, then you probably don't care about the quality of your shoes, right? So why would I bust out $250 for a pair of your shoes if you haven't invested in telling your story in a succinct and sort of, the grammatical correctness is, I don't want to be the grammar police, but I kind of am. That kind of gets my go. Glastonbury was just back in the UK, and Glastonbury was on. I was watching on the telly, and who was the artist? I can't remember the artist, but anyway, amazing artist, and the lyrics came up on the screen behind. Now, this is being broadcast to millions globally, and they're missing apostrophes out of the lyrics. And I'm like, man, how disrespectful is that? And I'm not blaming the artist.
Whoever's job it was. Come on.
You've got to get that right. You're putting words up. So for me, that actually undermined the whole show, and I probably shouldn't have let it get to me, but it did.
But that's why you do the work that you do, man. Like you take such pride in that type of stuff. And you know what you were saying before, if you're not taking pride in the words that you're using and the grammar which you're using and the way you're articulating your story, what kind of respect is that demonstrating to your consumer or your customer? I love that.
100%.
Music to my wife's ears too, because she's like she's kind of a little bit of a copywriter for Arrive&Thrive. She'll like review stuff, and she's like big on the grammar situation, which she's great for me.
She's good, and I can see why you're branding. The instant feels I get off it is just a warm and kind of personal feel, which is what you want when you're talking about such an important thing as careers.
Thanks, man. Thank you, bro. Just another question I've got is, in terms of advice that you would give for people curious about writing, going down this road, aside from, because I think that piece of saying yes to different opportunities, what other advice would you give to someone?
So again, back to the kind of experience, just do it. You don't need a platform to stand on to shout or to write, just
open up a blog post, start writing.
And look, that wasn't available to me when I was a kid. Most of the match reports would have been a blog, right? Rather than the pieces of paper which my mum and dad have probably still got in their loft.
On the fridge.
Probably gone to the loft from the fridge now. But just get out there and do it. There is nothing stopping you. And, my wife had a huge career transition from being an accountant, which really she always used as a platform to be able to travel, but into
well played,
into being a pregnancy yoga teacher. And now when people discover that she used to be an accountant, after she's kind of, wandered around a room with a beautiful floaty kind of nature and her soft voice, they're shocked that she used to be an accountant. And I have, huge admiration for her for making that career jump. But ultimately, in answer to your question, she just did it. She was just like, to start with, it wasn't just pregnancy. It was broader yoga, and she'd just have people around her house, like friends, and she'd just teach them. And like, how cool is that? Just, I strongly believe, I don't think there is any barrier to any industry to just doing, just whatever it is, just doing. I mean, look, I maybe in technology industries it's investment into platforms, but there's probably always a scaled down version that you can just jump online and just have a play. And if that excites you, pursue it. Find a way to get paid for that passion.
Yeah, man, I love that. One of the things we always talk about with career design is just trying stuff. So you're not going to know if you like it unless you try it. And when you realise you don't like something, hey, that's still a win. Like, you're crossing off something that you don't want to do. And I think it's music to my ears when you're like, just try. Like, literally just give it a crack. Like, if you can't get your hands on the A1 version, if you're in a technology sector or engineering or whatever, there's going to be a scaled down version online or a kit that you can get or whatever. Give it a crack, because you're not going to know unless you try. And I think about my own journey with podcasting in particular. I was always like, I'd love to do a podcast. Like, and I was with Dan, I was like, oh mate, how cool would it be a podcast? He's like, podcasting, Taco? We know nothing about that. And I was like, yeah, but we can give it a crack, man. Like, who's to say we can't give it a crack? He's like, yeah, it's a good point. So I think, just taking action is such an important step. And I must say too, my wife has, she did your wife's avocado baby yoga classes and loved them. And I was just thinking then too, it'd be nice to actually have like a relaxing floating voice when you're doing your tax return as well. Take the stress off the...
Hey, that's a great idea. Maybe she can kind of merge her two careers together. That's great. But I think you make a great point about realizing that something isn't for you, and sometimes that's a hard realization, right? When I realized I wasn't going to be a sports journalist, that was hard, because that would been from the age of 7 to 22 maybe. That had been my journey, and I told everybody, hey, that's what I want to do, that's what I want to be, and for me to go, do you know what, I've realised now that's not exactly for me. That was hard to swallow. It was hard to admit to myself, and then it was hard to sort of tell other people. But yeah, by never close doors, in my opinion, always keep doors open, but by actually...
As in relationships with people, is that what you mean by the door piece? Or?
Opportunities, relationships, whatever it is. Yeah. But by actually kind of walking away from one door and opening up another door, it took me a lot of courage to kind of do that. But I think it's a great point of yours just to say, actually, I've explored that, and no, that's not for me, or that's not for me anymore, or that's not for me right now.
Yeah, awesome, man. Bro, one very last question before I ask you what you're raw about. In terms of, your day-to-day, can you give us a quick snapshot around what your current day-to-day is? Like, are you just on the computer punching out words, or are you having strategy meetings? Yeah, give us a snapshot.
Yeah, sure. So life kind of comes in flows and rhythms for me. I try and keep a 9 to 5-ish kind of structure. And look, that's not always been the case. There's been times when I've had to kind of crack the laptop before the kids are awake, or after the kids have gone to bed, undoubtedly. But I try and keep a framework. Obviously, I'm self-employed. There's no one telling me that I need to be anywhere. But it kind of helps with me, and that's not to say that that's for everyone. I'm not a huge one for I'm not a routine monkey, but just kind of having that structure, I think, helps me and helps everyone around me, my wife and kids, to understand that that's the time that I'm at work. That's not to say that, hey, if I am not feeling creative, or actually I've got through the list, I just close the laptop and go home. I think it's really important. As I said, for me, it's about working to live. yesterday I was out visiting clients all day. I'll try and kind of block things. I work with a business coach, which is, again, something that I would recommend to people, especially if you're out there working on your own, to be able to sound off to somebody who isn't your partner. And, you know, of course it's great to speak to your partner as well, but, you know, sometimes they get
a bit jaded with your stories.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So, yeah, she Monique, my business coach, who's been on the journey over the last 6-7 years for me while I've been doing my own gig, has always been great to try and help me to block things and to go, hey, to understand this is my creative time. So this is when I'm going to write. This is where I'm going to think. This is where I'm going to research. You know, and again, to visit clients, because for time efficiencies, hey, to go, right, today I'm going to be at the office, so I'm going to try and see 3 clients, but manage my energy as well, and realise that if I try and see too many, I'm going to get tired and not be at my best, and therefore maybe it's best, even though it might mean 2 trips to Melbourne over a period of time, that, you know, that's okay. So I think, it's important to look inwardly and understand your energies and your flows, and to try and line up the kind of work that you do with those periods. And look, that's a luxury that I now have working for myself. I appreciate you working for somebody else. You don't necessarily have that fluidity and kind of that flexibility. But, you know, I think especially in today's world, if that's what you want, just ask. What's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to say, no, you need to spend this time doing this. Okay, cool, that's fine. You know, I think in this kind of post-pandemic world, a lot more sort of managers do understand, and good leaders do understand that, you know, we're people. We're not robots, and therefore we work better in better ways and better at better periods. And hey, just to say, look, I know you want me to do X, Y, Z, but do you mind if I do this now and this later? Or, you know, just to communicate, constantly communicate. Don't just assume that that's okay, or don't just assume that they'll understand, because they're not, you know, no one's a mind reader. So yeah, look, my day today, I try and put some structure around my week, and kind of to feel that balance. And again, just and I guess this has come with experience, but we kind of just trust your instinct a little bit. Hey, I've got a lot of work coming up. If I put this time in now, I think I'm going to be able to manage those deadlines. Just to get as much foresight as you can. I don't plan meticulously. I have rough plans. I could definitely invest more time. I know you're great at it, Ty, in kind of technology and how technology can support me. I'm not sort of necessarily wired that way, but I've definitely sort of invested some time to kind of understand what works for me and what doesn't. But yeah, just my day to day, as you probably noticed, I love talking to people. I love those periods of interaction and engagement, but, you know, you've also got to find a way to kind of punch away at the laptop and it not be 1 o'clock in the morning when, you know, you unless you're a night owl, you're going to wake up the next day and you're not going to be at your best. Yeah, we've got to enjoy work. We spend a lot of time at work. We've got to be our healthiest physically and mentally and emotionally. And we've got to manage all those things against the backdrop of, hey, I'm just trying to put some food on the table and a roof over the head for kids, and to keep sight of whatever that objective for earning money is. I think it's really important just to say I work because I have to. I think it's really important to look at those kind of goals, whether it's a holiday or whether it's a house or a car. Hey, you know, this is what I'm working towards. This is how I'm going to set up my day accordingly. But to caveat that, I think it's also really important to understand that life is a journey that we're always on, and there's not necessarily a kind of destination. So not to think too much about, how am I going to feel when I get that car? Because the chances are you possibly won't feel as you think you're going to. But hey, just keeping those objectives ahead of you. Keep looking towards what those goals are, and if you need any extra motivation to get out of bed, then use them to help you get there.
Yeah, love it, man. All right, brother. We're going to ask you, the little segment that we always ask all of our guests. I've got to honour Danny's theme music.
Taco. I'm roaring.
I'm brewing. I'm soaking it up.
Taco, just thought I'd drop in with a little late night surprise for you.
It still cracks me up.
I'm not sure if you can hear the sizzling. I'm just sort of stewing on that.
Thoughts? I'm roaring.
So, Tommy, what are you roaring about, man?
I love that. I love that. What am I roaring about? So I just finished Wim Hof's book.
I'm reading that at the moment, actually.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. So he's a pretty kind of hot's an ironic word, but a hot name out there. Hot name out there at the moment. And I think, yes, Wim Hof is about cold water therapy, but most importantly for me is about breathing and is about love. For him, at the heart of everything is love. And man, again, there's another free, accessible tool that we all have available to us, whether it's loving ourselves or it's loving somebody else, whether it's loving a career, I think is to discover our love and our passion and to pursue that. I think I've said that many times over the last hour, but so Wim Hof, beautiful guy, and you think, wow, how do you create that much time in your life that you can spend an hour breathing in the morning? He gets up at 4 a.m. to do that. Which is incredible, but he's just carved himself a life around what he loves doing, what's good for him, how he's at his best. The other thing that I'm roaring about is the High Performance podcast at the moment by Jake Humphries, who's a sports editor in the UK, and his podcast partner Damien, who's a psychologist, and they getting access to some incredible leaders, both inside and outside of sport, and having some really incredible conversations with them about ultimately what makes them tick. So that's right down my alley, but I think it's super accessible for everybody. The High Performance podcast, and again, the threads that I'm getting for it is love, because hey, at the end of it, we all kind of end this life in the same way, right? So whether you're rich, whether you're not rich, whether you have certain things or you don't have certain things, but the one thing that we can all really have is love and passion, and I think it's really important to pursue those two things. So yeah, Wim Hof, High Performance, that's what I'm roaring about right now.
Love it, man. And for listeners, Tommy also runs his own podcast with Sammy, another gentleman in the co-working space, called Dad Focals.
That's right.
Sharing dad stories and interviewing different people about being a dad. I was honoured to be on their potty a couple of episodes ago, and so if you are interested in that type of content, please tune in, because it is quality. Keep up the good work, man. It's awesome.
Thank you, Ty, and thanks so much for having me on. Really enjoyed it.
Pleasure, brother. Thanks, man.
Thank you.